Welcome to this explainer. There's a crazy stat out there. Some psychological studies suggest that up to 70% of workplace issues are linked to just avoiding difficult conversations. 70%. That's a massive number. So today we're unpacking some really fascinating source material that breaks down the true anatomy of exactly what happens when we hold back. We're talking about the hidden cost of silent conflict. We kind of always think that by smiling, nodding, and just keeping the peace, we're doing the mature thing, right? But the text we're analyzing today flips that entirely on its head. Because as it turns out, silence isn't quite as empty or as peaceful as it seems. Let's get right to it.
Is avoiding conflict really peaceful? I actually want you to just sit with that for a second. The source material forces us to look in the mirror and genuinely challenge this deeply held assumption that stepping back from an argument is what actively maintains harmony. I mean, we constantly pat ourselves on the back for being the bigger person or for keeping the waters calm. But the text asks a much tougher question. If you are totally churning on the inside, is the situation actually peaceful? Or have you just successfully hidden the war from everyone else?
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. The illusion of peace. So, unpacking this first major concept from our text, we aim for this idea of perceived peace. We dodge confrontation simply because it's uncomfortable, and our intention is just to maintain harmony. But the source text throws a major red flag here, explicitly warning us that this avoidance is literally just a temporary illusion. When we sweep things under the rug, they do not magically disappear. Instead, the text uses such a perfect word. They fester. Unresolved issues fester and they grow. Think about ignoring a roommate or a partner's messy habits. You bite your tongue when they leave the kitchen a total disaster, telling yourself, it's no big deal, better just keep the peace. But man, 3 weeks later, you are absolutely furious over a single misplaced spoon. What started as a tiny annoyance transforms into a heavy buildup of resentment, deep frustration, and this lingering anxiety. You think you're dodging a moment of awkwardness, but actual reality dictates you're signing up for prolonged, quiet agony. That harmony you think you're preserving, it's entirely superficial. Because the truth is, when you stop fighting the external battle, the conflict doesn't vanish, it just moves inward.
Which brings us to Section 2, the internal toll. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the source material defines what happens to your own mind when you stay silent. The text explains that the second you avoid addressing an external conflict, you immediately start grappling with internal contradictions. And honestly, this is profound. By not speaking up, your actions, or in this case, your inaction, no longer align with your core values. It's almost this weird form of self-betrayal. You start questioning your own beliefs. You start questioning your actions. You know exactly what you should have said, but you didn't say it. You're basically telling your own brain that keeping the external relationship smooth is way more important than your internal truth. And that massive disconnect between what you believe is right and what you're actually doing creates an intense psychological friction. It leaves you flooded with feelings of deep confusion and, ultimately, a ton of guilt. You're no longer just annoyed at someone else. You are fundamentally at odds with yourself.
And the source material makes it very, very clear that it doesn't just stop at a little bit of guilt. No, the internal costs escalate. The text maps out a really dangerous progression here. We start with that confusion and guilt from the internal contradiction, sure, but prolonged avoidance of confrontation does something even more damaging over time. It actively erodes your self-confidence. Every single time you have the opportunity to stand up for yourself and you consciously choose to stay quiet, you are silently telling your brain that your voice doesn't matter. The text warns that you'll begin to doubt your very ability to handle difficult situations or to assert yourself at all. And this creeping self-doubt is incredibly dangerous because, as the source notes, it directly hinders your personal and professional growth. You are shrinking yourself just to keep a fake peace. But here's the real tragedy. Silent conflict doesn't just stay trapped inside your head. We avoid conflict because we think we're saving our relationships. But the great irony the text reveals is that our silence is exactly what destroys them.
Let's look at Section 3, straining your relationships.
The text brilliantly illustrates this tragic irony with this quote: "When issues are left unaddressed, they can create a barrier between people." The source text hits the nail absolutely on the head here. This invisible barrier goes up, brick by brick, every single time you say, "Oh, it's fine," when it is definitely not fine. The text explicitly links this unaddressed tension to a cascade of relational failures. First, it leads to massive misunderstandings because the other person has absolutely no idea what you're actually feeling. The text points out a really crucial dynamic here. Silence forces the other person to guess your boundaries, and by making them guess, you are essentially setting them up to fail. This dynamic inevitably breeds deep resentment, and ultimately, it leads to the complete breakdown of trust. Because if you think about it, trust isn't just about honesty, it's about transparency. When you go silent, you become completely opaque to the people who care about you. You tried so hard to protect the relationship by avoiding a tough conversation, but that barrier of silence ended up suffocating the whole thing anyway.
So, the crucial point is that we have to change our approach. Section 4, confronting the conflict.
The text leaves absolutely no ambiguity here. It states it so plainly. It is healthier to address issues directly and respectfully. Period. Now, yes, it specifically acknowledges that it's going to be uncomfortable. Discomfort is just part of the deal. But we really have to learn to separate uncomfortable from bad. Think of it like going to the gym, right? Your muscles ache the next day, but that ache means the muscle is growing stronger. The text urges us to view relational discomfort in the exact same way. The temporary awkwardness of a direct, respectful conversation is actually a sign of health, whereas that comfortable, easy silence we talked about earlier, that's a sign of decay. Confrontation, when it's done with respect, isn't an attack on the relationship. It is an act of saving it. It clears the air, it aligns your external actions with your internal values, and it tears down that invisible barrier way before it ever has a chance to solidify.
Let's move to and see how this builds into a practical roadmap. Step 1, address issues directly. Stop beating around the bush and stop letting things fester. Step 2, resolve conflicts respectfully. Being direct definitely doesn't mean being cruel, it just means being clear. And finally, step 3, foster personal growth. The text highlights something awesome here. Taking these difficult but healthy actions doesn't just fix the immediate problem and build stronger relationships. It fundamentally reverses that nasty erosion of self-confidence we talked about earlier. By proving to yourself that you can actually handle difficult situations, you spark your own personal and professional growth. You literally reclaim your voice. Which brings us to our final takeaway, and really, the ultimate question you have to ask yourself based on everything we've unpacked in this explainer today. What is your silence really costing you? Is it costing you your peace of mind? Your self-confidence, maybe the trust in your closest relationships? The source material makes a deeply compelling case that avoiding the temporary discomfort of confrontation comes with a massive, hidden, and lingering price tag. So the next time you're tempted to just swallow your words to keep the peace, I want you to remember this. A silent conflict is still a conflict. You just have to decide if you want to fight it out in the open where it can actually be resolved, or if you want to fight it endlessly against yourself. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll leave you to think on that.